Next, I wanted to continue the topic of impacts to our planet, particularly ones that have happened, not theoretical ones that I put into an internet-based forum. So I wanted to talk about an event that happened um, many years ago. Many people believed that this event was the act of divine intervention on our planet. I want to talk to you today about the Tunguska event. One of the people who I will go to talk about this event is going to be the great and wonderful Carl Sagan. In his book Cosmos, chapter 4, excuse me. In the early morning hours of June 30th, 1908, in central Siberia, a giant fireball was moving rapidly across the sky. Where it touched the horizons, an enormous explosion took place. It leveled some 2,000 square kilometers of forest and burned thousands of trees in a flash fire near the impact site. It produced an atmospheric shock wave that circled the Earth twice. For 2 days afterward, there was so much fine dust in the atmosphere that one could read a newspaper at night by scattered light in the streets of London, 10,000 kilometers away. The government of Russia under the Tsars could not be bothered to investigate so trivial an event, which, after all, had occurred far away among the backward Tungus people of Siberia. It was 10 years after the revolution before an expedition arrived to examine the ground and interview the witnesses. These are some of the accounts they brought back. Early in the morning, when everyone was asleep in the tent, it was blown up into the air, together with the occupants. When they fell back to earth, the whole family suffered slight bruises, but Akulina and Ivan actually lost consciousness. When they regained consciousness, they heard a great deal of noise and saw the forest blazing round them, and much of it devastated. I was sitting in the porch of the house at the trading station of Vanavora at breakfast time and looking towards the north. I had just raised my axe to hoop a cask when suddenly the sky was split in two, and high above the forest, the whole northern part of the sky appeared to be covered in fire. At that moment, I felt a great heat as if my shirt had caught fire. I wanted to pull off my shirt and throw it away, but at that moment, there was a bang in the sky and a mighty crash was heard. I was thrown to the ground, about 3 sahins away from the porch, and for a moment, I lost consciousness. My wife ran out and carried me into the hut. The crash was followed by a noise like stones falling from the sky or guns firing. The earth trembled, and when I lay on the ground, I covered my head because I was afraid that stones might hit it. At that moment, when the sky opened, a hot wind, as from a cannon, blew past the huts from the north. It left its marks on the ground. When I sat down to have my breakfast beside my plow, I heard sudden bangs, as if from gunfire. My horse fell to its knees. From the north side above the forest, a flame shot up. Then I saw that the fir forest had been bent over by the wind, and I thought of a hurricane. I seized hold of my plow with both hands, so that it would not be carried away. The wind was so strong that it carried off some of the soil from the surface of the ground. And then the hurricane drove a wall of water up the Angara. I saw it all quite clearly because my land was on a hillside. The roar frightened the horses to such an extent that some galloped off in a panic, dragging the plows in different directions, and others collapsed. The carpenters, after the first and second crashes, had crossed themselves in stupefaction, and when the third crash resounded, they fell backward from the building onto the chips of wood. Some of them were so stunned and utterly terrified that I had to calm them down and reassure them. We all abandoned work and went into the village. There, whole crowds of local inhabitants were gathered in the streets in terror, talking about this phenomenon. I was in the fields and had only just got one horse harnessed to the harrow and began to attach another one. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like a single loud shot to the right. I immediately turned round and saw an elongating, flaming object flying through the sky. The front part was much broader than the tail, and its color was like fire in the daytime. It was many times bigger than the sun, but much dimmer, so that it was possible to look at it with the naked eye. Behind the flames trailed what I thought looked like dust. It was wreathed in little puffs, and blue streamers were left behind from the flames. As soon as the flame had disappeared, bangs louder than shots from a gun were heard. The ground could be felt to tremble, and the window panes in the cabin were shattered. I was washing wool on the bank of the River Con. Suddenly, a noise like the fluttering of wings of a frightened bird was heard, and a kind of swell came up the river. After this came a single sharp bang so loud that one of the workmen fell into the water. This remarkable occurrence is called the Tunguska Event. Wow. Darn it. Darn. Well, I lost my bookmark, so that stinks, but maybe after the podcast I'll find my spot in the book. I apologize for my dramatic reading, and I don't know if you can hear it in the recording, but Carmela was sitting right next to me with her ball right here. This little ball. You can squeeze it and it makes a sound. She's funny. Took her to the dog park, had her run as much as I possibly could. She's been sleeping for a good majority of the day after. We're hanging out. I didn't have to work today, my other job. So luckily I got to spend a little extra time with her yesterday and today. But anyways, the Tunguska effect. Carl Sagan goes later on in the book to describe this event, and he takes a different angle on it because he talks about asteroids and kind of the belief of many people at the time who believed that it was some kind of religious experience or religious event. It's the gods raining down on its people. Not this particular event, the Tunguska event, but previous asteroids that have been recorded in the past, where people believe that it's the gods raining down their wrath on Earth, sending us to our death because of sins that we have accrued throughout our lifetimes. And some of them were big, some of them were small, some of them were recorded very detailed, especially the Tunguska event, but others were just pictures on a wall. But be that as it may, this is an event and this is something that I feel as though is important to talk about. So let's talk about the Tunguska event. See, this is the forest after the explosion. See just the sheer damage done. All right. Despite its notoriety in pop culture, hard scientific data covering the Tunguska event is sparse. Since 1928, more than 40 expeditions have explored the site. Some seismic and air pressure wave registrations recorded immediately after the blast survive to this day, and surveys of the devastated forest mapped some 30 years later. The explosion was powerful enough to flatten more than 80 million trees. At the time of the event, international newspapers speculated about a volcanic eruptions. Russian scientists like Dr. Arkady Vosnesensky, director of the Magnetographic and Meteorological Observatory at Irkutsk, speculated about a cosmic impact. In 1927, Russian mineralogist Leonid Alexeyevich Kolik of the Russian Meteorological Institute explained the event as the mid-air explosion of a meteorite, based on the lack of an impact crater on the ground and the discovery of interplanetary dust and peat layers at the site. In 1934, Soviet astronomers based on Kulik's work proposed that a comet exploded in Tunguska. Such an icy body entering the atmosphere would rapidly heat up and evaporate explosively in midair without ever hitting the ground. The resulting explosions could have been powerful enough to flatten trees without leaving a crater or much other evidence. A new paper by Daniil Krenikov at the Siberian Federal University in Russia tries to answer the questions about the nature of the impactor using computer simulations. By simulating the effects of an asteroid made of rock and metal alloys and a comet made mostly of ice and traces of interplanetary dust with varying sizes ranging from 160 to 600 feet or 50 to 200 meters, entering Earth's atmosphere at a speed of 12 miles per second or 20 kilometers a second. The simulations show how friction with the atmosphere heats the object, but while rock and iron vaporize at about 3,000 degrees Celsius, water evaporates at only 100 degrees Celsius. Based on the calculation to the authors, an icy body large enough to explain the devastation at Tunguska would have traveled no more than 186 miles or 300 kilometers through Earth's atmosphere before vaporizing completely. Some reports of the Tunguska events describe a series of explosions in the sky, suggesting that the impactor traveled some 435 miles or 700 kilometers through the atmosphere. According to the authors, this observation excludes the possibility that the Tunguska event was caused by an icy body. Only a 650-foot wide stony iron asteroid could have traveled so far. To explain the lack of any crater on the ground, the researchers suggest that the asteroid didn't actually hit Earth, but enter Earth's atmosphere over Siberia and pass westwards, leaving the atmosphere over Europe, causing a series of airbursts in midair, explaining the series of observed explosions and flattened trees in Siberia, and leaving behind a plume of dust in the upper atmosphere, explaining the reports of glowing clouds over Europe after the event. There are recent examples of similar events. On August 10th, 1972, an asteroid with an estimated 9 to 45 feet or 3 to 14 meter diameter passed within 35 miles of Earth, 57 kilometers, causing a fireball in the sky seen above Utah to Alberta. On February 5th, 2013, a fireball streaked over the Russian city Chelyabinsk and exploded. The light from the meteor was brighter than the sun, visible up to 62 or 100 kilometers away. Some eyewitnesses also felt intense heat from the fireball. The explosions generated a bright flash as well as a large shock wave, injuring about 1,500s. The calculations also showed that a direct impact with the Tunguska asteroid would have created a crater 2 miles wide. Oh, it's just all right. Chelyabinsk meteor. This is what we're gonna search up. I'm gonna show you this video of this because I remember watching this on social media. Here it is right here. That A is right where it is. Jeez. There it is. Crazy. Thank God they got dash cams. Look at that thing. Yeah, I think the world would be over if I saw that in the sky. Jeez. Ooh. Jeez. You can hear that. Look at the windows broken right there. Wow. Охренеть. Где-то упал. You just hear those explosions. Wow. Some office buildings. Oh. They were just looking at the light. Wow. Look. Yeah, I'd be questioning what the hell's going on. Gee, that was a little guy. Yeah. Yeah, these things are dangerous, and it's not like they're going to be hitting us every single day, and you should fear for your life every single day that you're going to get hit by one of these, but it does happen. And the Tunguska event is a particularly sobering one because one of the key things about it, one of the key properties of that particular asteroid was they believe that it was made of ice. In the book Cosmos by Carl Sagan, he goes on later to talk about its composition, and many people believe that it was made of ice. And it's important to just, I mean, so lucky, so lucky. If that had been like we saw in the simulation that I did earlier, you can have the ice, which I forget the exact density of it, but you could see that you could change the density. And as you make it more and more dense, it's going to cause more and more damage because it's going to be able to survive longer in our atmosphere before it burns up. Ice burns up very easily because it's just water, whereas a rock or some type of iron or metal takes a while to burn up because those are very hard to liquefy and burn up. Now, I'm going to show you the exact paper that was released on this. This was mentioned in the article. Here it is. This is on the possibility of through passage of asteroid bodies across the Earth's atmosphere. We have studied the conditions of through passage of asteroids with diameters 200, 150 kilometers, consisting of three types of materials: iron, stone, and water ice, across the Earth's atmosphere with a minimum trajectory altitude of 10 to 15 kilometers. The conditions of this passage with subsequent exit into outer space with the preservation of a substantial fraction of the initial mass have been found. So they can pass right through the atmosphere, not hitting the surface, but getting pretty close, which is cool to think about. The results obtained support our idea explaining one of the lifelong standing problems of astronomy, the Tunguska phenomenon, which has not received reasonable and comprehensive interpretations to date. We argue that the Tunguska event was caused by an iron asteroid body, which passed through the Earth's atmosphere and continued to the near solar orbit. So they're claiming that it actually wasn't ice. it was an actual piece of metal, or it was made entirely of metal, or at least a large portion of it was metal, and that's why it was able to go through right there. Even though earlier we saw in that Forbes article, the reason why they don't believe that there is a um, crater or anything such of the sort on the ground is because it was ice and it burned up in the atmosphere. However, this is saying differently. All right, all right. And this is kind of going through right here. Schematic diagram of the motion of a space body in the Earth's atmosphere and the angle of entry with the atmosphere. Trajectory is length with the atmosphere. Blah, blah, blah. You can kind of see adding some equations right here. You can see, so it kind of comes in, this asteroid does, comes in right here, hits the atmosphere, slows down a little bit, and then that changes its trajectory, which would have otherwise been straight had there been no atmosphere. Does not involve the process of SB fragmentation. We got Carmela joining us because I made the mistake of taking out some strawberries. All right. Hey, hi, Carmi. Wants to join in. She's joined in before. All right, and we'll continue on to results. Figure 2 illustrates the result of calculating trajectory of spherical iron. Blah, blah, blah. Just kind of shows you what it looks like in figure 4 right there. And you can see 5 degrees, 12 degrees, and so on and so forth. Show you the trajectories as this thing goes through our atmosphere. I apologize for Miss Carmela. Really getting into the shot right now, but we will continue onwards. I'm still sharing my screen, so you'll be able to see her in that top right corner, but we don't get distracted in this household. We continue onwards. Oh, she got the beef jerky. That's why she's up here. She's here for the beef biltong. That's how good this product is. I'm not sponsored. I am only a humble enjoyer, as is Carmela. I mean, this has to be the best endorsement that you could possibly receive for a product such as this. All right, but as we continue on, this is a paper that I'll link it down in the description. You can continue to read this on as you want. They go through all of the different ways that this might have been affected, particularly when it comes to the Tunguska event, how they believe that it actually went through the atmosphere. You can kind of see some illustrations of, depending on the material that it is, whether it burns up in the atmosphere, if so, at what point in the atmosphere, how long is its actual journey. More over here, and you can see over here figure 8 illustrates the variation of the velocity of SBs along the trajectory with radii r, radius being 100, 50, and 25 meters, basically 200, 150 meters across is what that is talking about. All right, figure 9 demonstrates changes in trajectories. All right, this is figure 8, as you can see right here. Come on, mamas. There you go. Mel's now balancing on me. All right. Figure 10 right here. This is iron, stone, ice. So you can see ice pretty much just drops straight off right here. Ice barely makes it through. However, if you got iron, that thing could make it all the way through and pop out on the other side. All right. Kind of lower her down. Yeah, figure 10 comparative of the velocity of the iron, stone, and ice along the trajectory with obviously 50, 100, and 200 meters diameter thing. The initial velocity is 20 kilometers a second. The minimum trajectory altitude is 11 kilometers. The curves for ice and with a mass of the SB vanishes because obviously the ice does not make it. All right. Application to the through passage model to the Tunguska phenomenon. So that's what their claim is. They are claiming that the Tunguska event was caused by this through passage where it passes through the atmosphere through one side, doesn't hit the surface, and flies through the other side. At present, there are over 100 hypotheses about the nature of the Tunguska phenomena. There are 3 to 4 predominant theories. They include the fall into Earth of a small asteroid measuring several dozen meters, consisting of typical asteroid materials, either metal or stone, as well as ice. Most probable material of the Tunguska SB mentioned in literature is ice. According to the available observational data, there are several variants of the direction and trajectory length of the Tunguska, from 400 to 600 kilometers, in particular with a propagation direction from south-north to east-west. Think back to those eyewitness reports where they saw, some of them said that they saw it in the north. The value of the angle of entry into the atmosphere mentioned in literature is 30 to 40%. The radius of Tunguska was estimated based on the amplitude of the shock wave recorded by seismic stations and amounts to about 25 meters, so about 50 meters in diameter. The minimum trajectory altitude of the Tunguska SB approximately corresponded to the point of maximum energy release. In figure 10, we show the results of the comparative calculations of the velocity variations of the iron, stone, and ice SBs that are, radius of 200 and 100 meters along the trajectory of the passage across the atmosphere for initial velocity of 20 kilometers a second. Stones lose their velocity faster than irons, and ice do not survive passage through the atmosphere. And then they demonstrate unusual trajectory of a stone with 50 meters or basically 100 meters radius compared to an iron core with the same size. And it continues to go on to talk about the trajectories, the makeup or the trajectories, the speed, all of this stuff, and how it depends on whether it's completely made of ice or if it's completely made of stone or iron. It all has different outcomes. Let's see. As the final comments, which can be considered as the plan for future research, we can mention the following problems. In our work, we did not deal with the problem of formation of a shockwave, although when comparing the Tunguska phenomenon with the Chelyabinsk meteorite with the size of about 10 meters and the altitude of maximum energy release of about 30 kilometers, we have no reason to doubt that the body that is 10 to 20 times larger with the altitude of maximum energy released of 10 to 15 kilometers at the velocity of 200 kilometers a second will create a shock wave with a huge amplitude and destructive force, capable of tree fall in an area exceeding 1,600 square kilometers. Experimental modeling of the knockdown effect of a shock wave from the source with cylindrical geometry was performed by Zatkin and Saikulin in 1966. The cylindrical source of the shock wave was modeled by long detonating cord inclined at a certain angle to the plane, planted with small sticks which imitated trees in the Siberian forest. It was shown that the shape of the area of fallen sticks was similar to the shape of real-life tree fall trajectory. However, they did not model the dependence of the strength of cylindrical shock wave on the height of its source above the ground. Instead, they added a point explosive at the lower end of their core to model a presumed spherical component of the shock wave. Because rates of the mass and energy losses, which caused Tunguska event, depend strongly on its altitude above ground, sharp increase in energy release close to the minimum altitude reached by the through passing SB can be interpreted as an explosion creating spherical component of the shockwave. Continues on and on and on. All right, let's go to summary. Based on the obtained results, you can make the following statements. The conditions for the possible through passage of a large space body composed of various materials across the Earth's atmosphere with minimal loss of mass and without collision with the surface of the planet are established. It was shown that this corresponds to the entry angles of space body into the atmosphere, less than 11.5 degrees. It was shown that the Tunguska space body could hardly consist of ice, since the length of the trajectory of such a body in the atmosphere before the complete loss of its mass would be less than the length of its trajectory estimated on the basis of observational data. This statement is valid for estimates performed for their value in the radiation heat transfer coefficient, as well as making allowance for uncertainties and variations of the values mentioned in the literature. The value of the angle of entry into the atmosphere of 30 to 40 degrees mentioned in the literature for the Tunguska Event space body looks unrealistic, since it corresponds to the trajectory of a fall of a body with large residual mass and the trajectory length, which is 1.5 to 2 times shorter than the estimated trajectory length based on the observational data. Such a fall would be accompanied by the formation of a large crater absent near the epicenter and around. Probably the most realistic version explaining the Tunguska phenomenon is the through passage of the iron asteroid body as the most resistible to fragmentation across the Earth's atmosphere at the minimum altitude of 10 to 15 kilometers with a length of the trajectory in atmosphere of about 3,000 kilometers and subsequent exit of this asteroid body into outer space to the near solar orbit. This version is supported by the fact that there are no remnants of this body and craters on the surface of the Earth. Within this version, we can explain optical effects associated with the strong dustiness of high layers of atmosphere over Europe, which caused bright glow in the night sky. If we admit the version of the complete loss of mass of SP after the passage of its epicenter or close to it, then the evidence of its reality would be the presence of droplets of meteoric iron of the millimeter size in the Earth's surface along the trajectory of SB and around. This follows from figure 8. The smaller the size of it and its mass, the faster it loses a velocity. Finally, when the velocity of a diminishing space body reduces to such an extent that its surface temperature reaches 1,000 degrees Celsius, the sublimation ceases, and the dominant mechanism of the mass loss consists in blowing off a liquid film from the surface of the body. In this case, the space body becomes a source of a huge amount of droplets, which will be sprayed by that particular space body. However, such microformations have not been found despite intensive searches around epicenter and far beyond. The absence of iron droplets around the epicenter is explained by high velocity of the space body, over 11.2 kilometers per second, when the surface temperature exceeds several thousand degrees. We only need 1,000. The dominant mechanism of the mass loss at those temperatures is sublimation of material in the form of single atoms that can be found on the Earth's surface as iron oxides, which do not differ from same widespread terrestrial materials. Very, very cool. So that's the Tunguska event. Could we potentially see something like that happening again in our lifetimes? I don't think so. Now, should we be worried? Yeah. There's been a couple episodes on Joe Rogan where he's had people come on and talk about asteroids that potentially could hit this planet at any time and the importance of knowing about this, because many times in our planet's past, large swaths of life has been wiped out. I mean, I've talked about a couple on this podcast. We all know how the dinosaurs ended. But there are other extinctions that have happened on this planet, which have taken us down to very, very little life on this planet. And the Tunguska event is one of the more recent examples of something that really could have ended badly. And you see how many people will argue that it could have been made with ice, and that's why there's no impact crater in it. All of that argument. Now we have somebody on the other side, this research paper put out, talking about how they believe that it just passed through the atmosphere, and it was so dense that it was actually able to survive it.